Hi, I'm back in my kitchen again. On one of my last videos, I got a comment about making bread. So that comment reminded me about my sourdough starter. I haven't made sourdough bread in ages. In ages means for a long time. So I haven't made sourdough bread in ages, or it's been ages since I made sourdough bread. Somewhere in the back of my fridge, I have a sourdough starter that I haven't used in a long time. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, it's in here somewhere. I think it's at the back somewhere. Here it is. Ugh, it doesn't look like I've used it in a long time, but you know what? I can make this work really, really well. Let's get started. So the first thing that I need to do, take the lid off. Oh, nope, still no luck. Oh, I got it. So take the lid off. Let's have a little look inside. I know this sourdough starter is still good, even though the water's on top and the flour's below, because when I smell it, it smells sour, but it smells good. It smells like sourdough. I'm going to pour off about half of just the liquid water on the top, so I'm going to get rid of that. I use a chopstick just to stir it in like this. So now you can see there's no more separation. The water and the flour are all mixed together. I realize that you can see that my kitchen is a bit of a mess behind me, and I could have cleaned it up before I started my video, but I thought it was more authentic to show you the kitchen the way it normally is, with stuff in the corners and dishes here and there, and it's just my normal way of being. Now I'm going to pour about half. As you can see, it looks very smooth and there are not very many bubbles in here. I put some water on to boil because I want to make sure that the water I'm using for my sourdough starter has less chlorine in it. So when I boil the water, the chlorine evaporates off. So I'll pour about 50 mils of water into my measuring cup. As I wait for the water to cool, I'll measure about 80 mils, or a third of a cup of flour. This is my flour. So about that much. That looks pretty good. My water is now at room temperature, and I have my sourdough starter. I'm going to pour the water into my sourdough starter. And now I'm going to put my flour into my sourdough starter. Try not to make too much of a mess. Spilled a little. It's okay. This. With my chopstick, I'm going to stir the sourdough starter, so now you can see it's all mixed together. So that looks pretty good. The sourdough starter is pretty smooth, but I wanted to get to the point where it's really bubbly. So the next step is to put the lid on. I need to find a warm spot in my kitchen so that the sourdough can be activated. I fed it with water and with flour, and now it needs to start to bubble up. You may think it's strange, but I'm going to put the sourdough over here on the floor of my kitchen. I have a heated floor, and it's the perfect temperature to get the sourdough started. I'll come back in a couple of hours to feed it again. When I say to feed it again, I mean to add more flour and more water. Hi again, it's been a couple of days. Let's go over and check and see how the sourdough starter is doing. Okay, let's open it up and see how it's doing. In the last day or so, I fed it a little bit more, and feeding it means I added more flour and water, so that's what makes the sourdough look so great and bubbly. It's time to make the bread dough, so I'm going to go down here and open up my drawer, and let's see here. I'm going to get out some bowls. Okay, I need this really big bowl. Oh, it's quite heavy. And I'll also keep one of these little bowls. I have everything I need. These are my measuring cups. This is for water, And these are the measuring cups for the flour. I have my measuring spoons. I have my really big bowl. And over here, I have my spatula or my stirring spoon. In here, I have the flour that I'm going to use. I also have hemp hearts, which I like to add to my bread. And of course, the very important sourdough starter. So this is what I use instead of yeast. And this is what will help my bread to rise. I'll go back over here and look at my shelf full of recipe books. I have so many recipe books. Wow, this is the one I'm looking for. And as you can see, it's not very well organized. Ah, here it is, sourdough bread. As you can see, I've used this recipe a lot. It's kind of stained and messy. I start this recipe off with 5.5 cups of white flour. So I'm going to use my cup measures to start measuring the flour. 1, 2, 5, and this is the half. Next, I put in a tablespoon of salt. Go, a tablespoon of salt. Now I want to stir all the salt in so that's nicely mixed. Next, I add a quarter cup of hemp hearts. And that's what the hemp hearts look like. Next, I measure 2 1/4 cups of water that's been boiled, but is not hot. You can see that this is hot water, so I'm going to let this cool. So there's 2, and I measure 1/4 cup. There we go. So I'll leave that on the counter to cool off. Next, I'm going to measure 1/3 cup of this delicious bubbly sourdough starter. Look how many bubbles it's got in it. Yep, that looks pretty good. My water is now cool, so I put it in this bowl. And now I'm going to add the sourdough starter to the bowl as well. Time to whisk it up a bit. Now add the sourdough starter that's in the water to the flour and stir it up. Put a little bit of olive oil on your hands and knead the bread for about 1 minute. Put this on your hands and knead the bread for about a minute. Now your bread dough looks like this. I'm going to cover it up with a wet cloth and I'm going to put it back on my heated floor overnight. Here's my damp cloth. Here's my bread dough. I'll leave it there overnight. Good morning. It's finally baking day. Let's go over and see if the bread dough rose overnight. Oh yeah, look at that. Perfect. The first thing I'm going to do is sprinkle a little bit of flour onto my wooden cutting board. So this is so the dough doesn't stick to the board. Now I'm going to turn my dough out onto the cutting board. As you can see, the bread dough is quite sticky. I knead the bread dough and fold it over several times. I use this parchment paper to line a small bowl. Then I carefully place the bread dough inside the bowl. I trim the paper around the bowl. I cover the bread dough with a damp cloth, and then I put it back on my heated floor. I want to give the dough a chance to rise again. I use this heavy Dutch oven to bake the bread in. So as you can see inside, it's an enamel cast iron pot. I turn my oven on to about 450 Fahrenheit, so we want to get it really nice and hot. And now I put my Dutch oven inside my oven to preheat it while the bread is rising. I preheat the Dutch oven for 40 minutes. Now we wait for the Dutch oven to heat up and the bread dough to rise. Okay, time to take the very hot Dutch oven out of the oven and to put the bread dough inside the Dutch oven. Ooh, look how well my bread dough's risen in 40 minutes. It looks perfect. I have to use my oven mitts because the Dutch oven is extremely hot. I pop the bread dough inside the Dutch oven, being very careful not to burn my fingers. I snip the bread dough with scissors so that the loaf can expand as it cooks. Then I put the lid on. I pop the bread in the oven, all ready to go, and I leave it in there for half an hour. After half an hour, I take the lid off the Dutch oven. The top of the bread is a beautiful golden color, but I take the lid off so it can get a little darker and go nice and crusty. Well, this is the moment that we have been waiting for. The bread is ready. Let's have a look. Oh boy. That looks really fantastic. I turn the bread out onto a cooling rack. Ooh, that's a bit hot on the fingers. I can tell by the hollow sound that the bread is cooked through. This was really more of a chance to listen to me chattering away in English. It definitely wasn't a cooking class. I had so much fun showing you how to bake this bread. If you want to try to make sourdough bread yourself, I recommend you look for a YouTube video or a recipe online. This is my favorite part right here. Let's cut the bread. Oh, wow. Yum, yum, yum. Thanks so much for watching Tag Along in English, and see you next time.